so we're going to try to keep this intro super brief and try to get into the anatomy of this legendary hero as quickly as possible. Needless to say, Superman arrived on Earth as the last living son of Krypton, so his powers and abilities were beyond human comprehension from the very beginning, and the yellow sun further augmented what he could do. From accidentally sneezing solar systems out of existence and pulling entire planets on a chain, to punching through reality itself and pulling a Kryptonite Moon into the sun, Superman has done a plethora of incredible feats, and all because of his body and mind. In this video, we'll be exploring everything there is to explore about Superman's anatomy. We haven't seen the new movie just yet, but we're really excited about it, so if we miss something that should be on this list that's included in that film, be sure to mention it in the comments down below. Either way, we're sure you're going to be awestruck by the details we're providing here, so without further ado, let's jump into it. By the way, we almost forgot, if you like this video, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you help us tremendously in producing more of these marvelous videos. Now, let's continue. After living until the 853rd century, Superman practically became a golden god who could destroy suns, travel time, and give people powers and resurrect them. The Superman of the 853rd century greatly superseded his regular self, who was already one of the strongest characters in comic book history. When everyone he loved died by the end of the 21st century, Superman made the necessary arrangements, like giving his responsibilities to Superman Secundus, and ultimately left Earth for an indefinite period of time. He crossed the stars, walked through time itself, and went beyond the furthest reaches of the DC universe. His journey stretched from the edge of the 21st century into the 700th, and some believe he went as far as heaven and hell during the course of his journey. During this time, he gathered new powers, new wisdom, and new knowledge from across the multiverse. When he returned, he forged a covenant with his descendants. He would share a fraction of his power with them, just enough to make them forces of justice in their own right, so long as they served the causes that he believed in. Then he disappeared again, and this time into the very core of the Super Sun, his fortress of solitude. Here, he waited and waited, and no one but he knew the reason behind all that waiting. It was after 15,000 years in the Super Sun that Superman Prime came out of it. By now, he was golden, transcendent, and practically unstoppable. That time in the sun had changed him as well as his powers. They were already vast, but all the time inside that sun, absorbing its radiation, increased his powers beyond measure. He pretty much dwarfed Cal Kent in strength and speed, and Cal Kent himself could outrun light and pull stars from orbit. But power wasn't all he gained. While in hibernation, Superman Prime had foreseen the sentient and villainous sun called Solaris and its betrayal thanks to his time-traveling ability. In the end, he destroyed Solaris as well, so yeah, he could destroy suns. But that's not all. He also got the ability to resurrect people, and that's how he resurrected his lost love, Lois Lane. But she was not a mere mortal any longer. She was now silver, had superpowers, and was an immortal. So, after lifetimes of grief, after watching humanity evolve and galaxies fall, Superman Prime had her back with him, and he felt he was whole again. Superman's body can absorb the most powerful DC object ever, making him a Kryptonian new god. Superman has come close to death more times than anyone can count, but in Absolute Superman number 9, he crossed into unfamiliar territory, like really unfamiliar territory. In this alternate reality, the only thing that could save him was a mother box, because that sentient piece of new god tech had immense powers, including the ability to heal and sustain life. So, after getting torn up in a fight against a cybernetically modified Peacemaker at the end of Absolute Superman number 8, Kal-El ends up severely wounded and hurt because of kryptonite flooding his system. You see, Brainiac gave Peacemaker plenty of kryptonite bullets, which were lodged in Superman's body. The Omega Men recover him, but even with their tech and skill, they can't pull all the bullets out because of his Kryptonian physiology. Superman, who was half conscious and in agony, decides to do the deed himself and grabs a set of pliers and rips a bullet out. It buys him time, but not much. Several of the kryptonite bullets still remain inside him, poisoning him from the inside out. At that point, Primus, a leader of the Omega Man, asks her crew to bring her, quote-unquote, the box. But her team hesitates because no one fully understands the object's full power. All they know is it's dangerous, unpredictable, and not meant for something like this. Primus reminds them that desperate times need desperate measures. Of course, what she's referring to is the Mother Box, one of the most advanced and sacred pieces of new god tech in the DC universe. These things heal wounds and talk to computers, but they also open boom tubes, manipulate reality, and bend energy and matter to their will. And now, it's in Superman's hands, or rather his body, or to be more accurate, his very cells. He absorbs the mother box, and the comic book panel doesn't quite depict Superman as a man recovering from his wounds, but as something new that's being born, something transformative and transitional. It seems that now, Absolute Superman will be a mix between a Kryptonian and a new god. Superman once split himself into two versions just because he could. Way back in the early 1960s, DC published a one-off story where Superman split himself into two after being exposed to a special type of kryptonite. The result was Superman Red and Superman Blue. The two were identical in power but different in personality, and together they solved every problem on Earth. They defeated all of Superman's villains, ended global conflict, and each married one of the women Clark Kent had loved, that is, Lois and Lana Lane. One Superman stayed on Earth, while the other left to start a new life on New Krypton. But decades later, DC decided to bring the concept back, albeit the stakes were higher this time. In the late 90s, when Superman became a pure energy being, Cyborg Superman and Toyman tried to tear him apart by scattering his energy across the galaxy. Instead of letting that happen, Superman used sheer will to split himself into two once more, one red, one blue, each fully formed, each with Superman's memories and powers. At first, neither version realized the other existed. They fought separate crimes, visited the League, and even turned stories into the Daily Planet. Everyone thought it was business as usual until the two finally crossed paths in Metropolis. Each thought the other was a fake, and the fight that followed leveled an abandoned part of the city. They stopped only when they touched and realized they were the same. Also, this physical contact between them not only hurt, but it also forced them to remember what really happened. Still, they didn't merge back together. In fact, they started to change. Superman Blue became more serious and often focused on precision and responsibility. Superman Red took a more passionate and humorous approach to hero work. Even their writing at the Daily Planet felt this because Blue's writing was too dry and Red's was too informal. But when Earth was about to collapse from the damage left by the Giants, both Superman Red and Blue used all of their energy to save it. It cost them their lives, but the world survived. Later, in Superman Forever, Clark Kent returned, once more, whole again, with his powers restored. Did Superman ever have long hair? You might already know this, but in the 90s, Superman had a sick mullet, and that's enough to define just how crazy and extreme the 90s were as a decade, but there's a fun story behind the super mullet. You see, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Superman was having a tough time staying relevant. Darker heroes like Batman, Spawn, and Wolverine had taken over comic book shelves, and Superman's squeaky clean and uber-righteous image was taking a back seat because of this. So, the creative team at DC had originally planned to rekindle the interest in readers by letting Lois and Clark finally get married. But when Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, went into production, the marriage ended before the wedding day arrived. Showrunners planned to build up to a wedding as part of the series, and DC decided the comics should line up with the TV arc. With the wedding on hold, DC still needed a big story for Krypton's last son. So what did they do? Well, they killed him, which happened in The Death of Superman, where Doomsday took him out. And in the aftermath, 4 new Supermen came onto the scene, and each of them wanted the mantle themselves. Then, in Superman, the Man of Steel number 25, the real Clark Kent came back from the dead. But by now, he had long hair, a new darker suit, and a slightly darker look to mark the change. As for the origin for the longer hair, it was quite practical and made sense, more or less. While Superman healed inside a Kryptonian reanimation matrix, his hair kept growing. When he returned, the creative team decided to keep it as a visual reminder that things had changed. Editor Mike Carlin said that they didn't want anything as drastic as the 4 Supermen again, but they needed some sign that Clark wasn't exactly who he had been. The mullet era lasted until late 1996, when the long-delayed wedding between Lois and Clark finally happened, both on television and in Superman, the Wedding Album. Clark cut his hair for the ceremony, and the mullet faded into comic book memory. Of course, cutting Superman's hair is another mess altogether because you pretty much have to use his heat vision, as there's nothing else that can do the job. In fact, a single strand of Superman's hair can lift thousands and thousands of pounds without breaking. Effects of different kryptonites on Superman. Oh, and the pink kryptonite that makes him gay. Firstly, did you know that kryptonite wasn't even supposed to be a weakness for Superman? Way back in the day, Clayton Bud Collier, the man who voiced Superman on the radio, wanted a week-long vacation, and they brought in replacements to create grunts and stuff, and the reason they gave was that Superman had been affected by kryptonite. Later, the comics followed suit, and it became so popular that kryptonite has become a synonym for weakness in the English language. And Over the decades, kryptonite has gone from a simple green weakness to a strange catalog of story devices. While green kryptonite remains the most common, DC has explored nearly every color in the box, and each one does something extremely different. For starters, green kryptonite, which first appeared in Action Comics number 161 in 1951 and has been used by everyone from Lex Luthor to Batman, it drains Superman's strength, dulls his powers, and can kill him with enough exposure. It works by cutting off a Kryptonian's ability to metabolize yellow sunlight, effectively turning them back into ordinary beings before slowly poisoning them to death. Red kryptonite, introduced in Adventure Comics number 255 in 1958, is where things start getting weird. At first, it caused mood swings and personality changes, but later it also triggered strange mutations. Superman has grown extra limbs, lost his morality, and had his head swapped with an ant. The effects are temporary but unpredictable, and that's what makes it dangerous. Gold kryptonite made its debut in 1962 in Adventure Comics 299. Originally, it could permanently erase a Kryptonian's powers. Post-Crisis, DC toned it down so that it only blocks their ability to process yellow sunlight for a limited time. Otherwise, every villain with a grudge would have been hunting for it. The blue kryptonite from Superman number 140 was designed to affect Bizarro in the same way green kryptonite hurts Superman. Later versions gave it different roles, like sometimes it acted as a cure for red kryptonite, and sometimes it nullified powers entirely. In the TV show Smallville, it actually supercharged Kryptonian bodies, and it was lethal to Bizarro. The black kryptonite first appeared in Smallville Season 4 and was later brought into continuity. It splits Kryptonians into two beings, one good and one evil. Both Superman and Supergirl have faced their darker selves because of it, and the concept has stuck around ever since. Silver kryptonite began as a joke in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen number 70 in 1963, but it actually came back in Smallville. It causes hallucinations, paranoia, and other mental symptoms. Superman once believed he was fighting Zod when exposed to the silver kryptonite. Pink kryptonite was introduced in Supergirl number 79 in 2003, and what it did was turn Kryptonians gay. In more recent media, like Justice League Action, pink kryptonite temporarily changes a Kryptonian's gender instead. It hasn't appeared much since, and it likely won't return anytime soon, and maybe it should remain that way. Lastly, the periwinkle kryptonite from Superman Family Adventures number 9 acts like Kryptonian alcohol. It lowers their inhibitions, makes them behave erratically, but doesn't cause real harm. It's not canon, but it's been used for comedic relief and lighthearted stories. There are more than 30 variations of kryptonite in total, but not all of them affect Superman or other Kryptonians, and some hurt plant life and humans just as much. What happens to Superman's body when he becomes a zombie? After Cyborg accidentally unleashed the anti-life virus, the infection spread through technology, transforming people as well as superheroes into violent, mindless killers in seconds. Superman did everything he could to hold the world together, but when Flash turned, there was no other choice because he became an incredibly fast delivery system for the virus. Superman used his own speed to intercept him and was forced to kill Barry Allen, but exposed himself to the virus in the process, which became an even bigger threat. He knew what was coming. Before the infection took full control of his body, he flew into orbit in the hopes of dying alone, but his plan didn't quite work, given his Kryptonian biology. He returned to Earth, fully consumed by the virus, and was now an uber-powerful monster. As the virus's most powerful weapon, his first goal was to stop the Ark ships that were meant to carry the last humans to the safety of space. His old allies tried to stop him. For instance, Wonder Woman forged a kryptonite-infused sword that managed to sever his arm, but it wasn't enough. He killed her before she could finish the job. John Kent, his son, put on the cape and tried to hold back what his father had become, and though he succeeded in launching the Ark ships, he couldn't stop Superman. The Green Lantern Corps arrived to quarantine the planet. Seeing as he couldn't defeat them all, Superman flew into the sun and began to feed on it. The Lanterns evacuated John and the others, but they were unable to stop what had already started. Earth was lost. Eventually, in Deceased, War of the Undead Gods, Superman was cured. How does Superman's body react to magic? Superman's weakness to magic has always been treated as one of his more ambiguous flaws. From a macro perspective, it seems that Kryptonian physiology has no special resistance to magic, so spells affect him like they would a normal human. That Sounds fair, but across comics, shows, and animated films, things haven't always been so black and white, mostly because different writers write him, and that's where the gray area begins to take shape. In some stories, magical objects overpower Superman's invulnerability entirely, so much so that a magical dagger could pierce his skin. DC has since clarified that Superman's weakness to magic isn't circumstantial, but something more fundamental. In Action Comics 1063, Bizarro infects Metropolis with a magical plague that turns people into darker versions of themselves, including Superman. The spell is so effective that even seasoned magic users like Dr. Fate fall under its sway. Superman is left to fight back with help from Bizarro Joker, who tells him that his Kryptonian body is weak to magic, and Superman realizes that one of the ways he can fight the effects of magic is by using his own mind, which is chock full of righteousness and all things good. Apart from this, in Batman Superman World's Finest number 36, he's trapped underwater by magical restraints, completely bound. His old flame, the mermaid, Lori Lemaris, tries to help, but fails. Superman then realizes he doesn't need to overpower the magic directly. He destroys the rocks anchoring the chains instead. In other words, the magic still works, but he works around it. In Superman number 18, he walks the magical dark roads alongside Zatanna. He admits that his problem with magic has never been just weakness. It's the chaos, the unpredictability that comes with magic. You see, he's used to rules, and magic doesn't have any, but by learning to accept its chaotic nature, he starts to find ways through it. How do different suns affect Superman? Superman's powers come from Earth's yellow sun, but his various exposures to other stars across the DC universe have led to his powers increasing manifold. In fact, different suns also give him new abilities, but then there's stars like the red suns that actually prove quite harmful to him. Under a blue sun, as seen in Action Comics number 857, Superman unlocked something called Superman Vision. He traveled to Bizarro World after Bizarro kidnapped Pa Kent and discovered that the planet orbited a blue sun. This star gave Superman a new optic ability that let him grant temporary Kryptonian powers to others. When Bizarro Doomsday threatened Jonathan Kent's life, Superman used this power to turn his father into a superhuman long enough to survive. A more recent upgrade was seen in the Warworld saga in Action Comics 1050. Superman's powers were weakened after radiation poisoning, and Mongol's Warworld ran on red sun energy, which drained him further. But when his allies converted Warworld's red sun into a white one, Superman's superpowers turned further super. He went beyond his usual limits, gained the ability to teleport across space instantly, and also got Superboy's tactile telekinesis. During a fight with Lex Luthor, Clark disassembled Lex's armor just by touching it. Later, in Action Comics 1054, he combined the White Sun's energy with a spark of Genesis, which is basically crystallized old god blood, and formed a massive energy construct of himself. This projection wiped out a kryptonite-fueled Metallo with ease. And then there's the Violet Sun from Superman 371. When exposed to its flares, Superman's power set expanded to include reality warping. At one point, he thought about needing money, and he found money in his hands. People aren't joking when they say this guy has every superpower. The difference between Superman's controlled and uncontrolled coitus. In Justice League number 12, Superman and Wonder Woman had a kiss that was heard around the world. And no, we're not kidding. Now, the two heroes have been romantically involved with each other in various story arcs and universes. Diana has dreamt about their wedding, and Clark once divorced Lois to be with Diana. So, if a simple kiss between them was heard around the world, imagine what would happen if Clark once again dumped Lois to hook up with Diana. That would be an earth-shattering event, or it'd at least create a few tsunamis. It's a good thing that they don't do it, and Clark does the controlled version of what Sheldon Cooper calls coitus. How many calories does Superman burn in a day? Superman doesn't need traditional food because he gets his energy from solar radiation, but he still performs various unimaginable tasks and therefore burns energy to do those things just in solar form. It is believed that he absorbs about 140 gigawatts of solar energy every 90 seconds. That adds up to roughly 49 million gigawatts a year. To put that in perspective, Earth's total annual power consumption is around 3,000 gigawatts, and as we just said, Superman's is 49 million. Now, one watt watt equals 0.239 calories per second, so 140 gigawatts in 90 seconds equals about 3 billion calories in that time span, which is roughly 32 million kilocalories per day. That's enough to fuel the entire planet many times over. For a human that doesn't live a sedentary lifestyle, the daily calorie burn typically ranges between 1,300 and 2,000 calories. Superman's energy budget exceeds ours by a factor of millions. His solar-absorbing metabolism effectively replaces the need for food, and he absorbs far more energy than any diet could ever match. While most of that energy goes towards maintaining his physiology and powering his abilities, he's absorbing way more than he ever uses at any moment. That surplus allows him to undertake feats far beyond anyone else's capacity. Now, imagine how much energy the Golden Superman must have absorbed. Does Superman poop? If so, is it indestructible? Yeah, Superman does go to the bathroom, and that's despite the fact that he draws energy from solar radiation. We've seen him eat in various instances, but when Lois once asked him if he needed to eat at all, he said that he didn't need to, but like to eat, that is. So yeah, his Kryptonian cells don't require food to survive, but he eats to connect with humanity and enjoys meals, so waste production naturally follows. Superhero digestion is largely similar to human digestion. Food breaks down into energy, water, dead gut bacteria, undigested fiber, and excess nitrogen that leaves the body through urine. Kryptonian gut fauna likely handles digestion similar to ours, although we must remember that this Kryptonian gut bacteria, or whatever it is powered by solar-boosted cells. As far as the question of his poop's indestructibility is concerned, I don't think it would be. It's not like Superman's waste would be hard as steel, because they're just waste products, unless he'd eaten something as hard as steel, which, to be fair, he totally could. His super colon and super bladder muscles give him control, but that doesn't mean they would turn an apple into a diamond. However, it's also possible that his solar-powered cells destroy matter down to atomic or subatomic levels. In that case, there would be little to no solid waste. These are the only two explanations as to why we don't have some serious drain clogging in Metropolis. So yeah, in our humble opinion, everybody poops, just like the good book says. Superman too has to take care of business. His poop isn't indestructible, and it's likely just, well, Superman poop.
Feel anything?
How does Superman save himself from the effects of kryptonite? Superman can't really become kryptonite-proof, but he uses clever workarounds and tech to protect himself from the effects of kryptonite. He can wear lead-lined gear, say in the form of a full suit, to block kryptonite's radiation. That would fully shield him, but it might put a limit on his powers. It would block his solar radiation absorption, and his heat vision and X-ray vision wouldn't be able to get through it, and it would be torn apart in difficult battles. Sometimes he takes prevention further. He's built kryptonite-proof vehicles, including the Supermobile, for emergencies where exposure seems unavoidable, such as when enemies mimic kryptonite radiation via sun-like energy. On rare occasions, Superman has experimented with controlled exposure. In a Silver Age story from Superboy number 58, he purposely took non-lethal doses from specific kryptonite fragments to build immunity, but it must be noted that it only worked against identical samples. In the Kingdom Come arc, an aged Superman became highly resistant to kryptonite thanks to years and years of solar absorption. That state made him briefly immune, but it's a pretty unique circumstance and is dependent on excessive absorption of the yellow sun radiation. In more recent stories, Superman harnesses an aura, or a subtle protective field around his body that can be projected or extended via force of will. This shields against environmental threats and radiation, potentially including kryptonite. But in truth, it strong arms and does not nullify the mineral's effect. For instance, in Superman Beyond number 10 by J.T. Kroll, Howard Porter, Livesey, Carrie Strachan, and Saida Temofonte, he pulled an entire moon made of kryptonite into the sun. Of course, he was wearing protective gear to shield himself from its effects. Having said that, there's no permanent cure for kryptonite issues, and it will always be his Achilles heel. How does Superman shave? Superman's invulnerability means that even his hair can't be cut with regular tools. However, it doesn't grow unkempt, and there are several explanations in the comics for how Clark Kent manages to stay clean-shaven and maintain a decent haircut while being functionally indestructible. Back in the Silver Age, writers claimed that Superman's hair and nails didn't grow under Earth's yellow sun. That meant there was no need to trim anything once he reached adulthood. But as Superman's powers evolved and stories moved towards a more grounded tone, they needed to show him as a man, a human, someone who did everyday things and faced everyday issues, including the problem of ever-growing hair and beard. Post-crisis, John Byrne introduced a version of Superman whose powers developed gradually, so for a while, Clark could use normal scissors or razors just like any other kid in Kansas. Once his powers matured and his skin turned near invulnerable, traditional razors stopped working, and that's when Superman had to get creative. He started using his heat vision, reflected off a curved piece of Kryptonian metal from his rocket ship. With enough control, he could aim the beam precisely to burn off the stubble without hurting himself, though he once admitted that a lapse in focus could still cause a nick, much like it does to any other man. Then, there are the red sun lamps in the Fortress of Solitude, which weaken him just enough to allow for a regular trim. As we mentioned earlier, in Superman 4, we saw that his hair was strong enough to hold a 1,000-pound weight. The movie also revealed that he would cut and donate his hair, which shows how he prevented it from falling into the wrong hand. Superman's suit and its fabric. For a guy who survives point-blank nuclear blasts and goes toe-to-toe with gods, Superman's super suit holds up suspiciously well. You'd think with all the punches, fire, and alien nonsense, the cape would have been reduced to threads by now, but nope, it always stays like it's brand new. So what's up with the suit? Is it indestructible on its own, or does Clark's power extend to whatever hugs his body tight enough? In Batman Superman World's Finest number 7, Superman meets a kid with powers like his, and the Kandorians offer up a suit made from Kryptonian fabric. Turns out, these threads react to Earth's yellow sun the same way Superman's cells do, which makes them durable in all the right ways, and back in the Silver Age, Martha Kent sewed Clark's first outfit using the blankets he arrived in as a baby. They didn't burn or tear, so she figured, why not stitch up a suit? In the Golden Age, the suit wasn't Kryptonian at all. Superman makes it himself. Then, post-Crisis on Infinite Earths, Clark's invulnerability came from a bioelectric aura that remains close to his skin, and anything that hugged his skin got the same protection. After that came the New 52, where DC gave Clark a Kryptonian battle armor that formed around him, all sleek and ready for war. It looked tough, felt alien, and was clearly meant to modernize the look. Eventually, the comics circled back to the simpler look, made from indestructible Kryptonian fabric once more. Things that could kill Superman. Superman might look like nothing in the world could possibly destroy him, but he does have a number of weaknesses. Kryptonite is the biggest one, sure, so we won't get into that, but there are other ways to weaken, wound, and kill Superman, and these things don't require glowing green rocks. After Kryptonite, magic is the most common weakness he has. Kryptonian cells drink sunlight like my stepmom in a pub, but they've got zero defense against enchantments and spells. Magic doesn't care how dense your skin is or how fast you move. If someone like Zatanna or Dr. Fate throws the right spell in your face, you're going down hard. Even Batman has used this gap in Soup's defenses. Alternate timelines love showing Bruce teaming up with mages or using enchanted weapons when the usual gadgets don't do the job. And then there's Shazam. He's like Superman's magical twin, only his powers come from ancient spells, not solar radiation. Also, there's the Red Sun issue. Earth's yellow sun supercharges Superman, but under a red sun, all of that power gets shut off, and the red sun basically acts as kryptonite for him. This idea dates back to the Silver Age, with Action Comics 300 showing Superman stuck under a red sun in the far future. Here, he had to resolve problems with his brain instead of his fists. It made its way into the Justice League animated series 2, where Superman ends up in a post-apocalyptic Earth and becomes, well, just a guy. Injustice 2 has Batman using a red solar grenade, and Lobo keeps red sun weapons on hand whenever he's got a job involving Clark. Even Superman has used red sunlight himself to tone things down and avoid, let's say, accidentally blowing up his girlfriend. It's probably how Lois survived giving birth to a half-Kryptonian son. Next, nuclear radiation. In Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns number 4, Superman gets blasted with a nuke and ends up looking like a shriveled skeleton. His powers vanish, and he barely survives by absorbing sunlight stored in nearby plants. He pulls through, but it proves that nukes can drain him dry. That concept made it into Batman v Superman, where Superman flies Doomsday into space to take a hit from a warhead. Doomsday absorbs the radiation and powers up, while Superman floats lifeless in orbit until the sun comes to the rescue. And finally, there's the Doomsday virus. In one reality, after killing Doomsday, Superman inhales the spores to keep others safe and ends up mutating into Super Doom, who is a bulked-up, armor-plated version of himself with serious anger issues. The virus made him stronger, but kept dragging him closer to total loss of control. His dog Krypto nearly fell apart just from being around him. What happens when a vampire bites him? In Superman number 180, Dracula makes what might be the boldest career mistake of his undead life. The ultra-powerful vampire tries to turn Superman into a vampire. On paper, the plan had potential. I mean, who better to have as your minion than Superman, right? He would be this solar-powered, bloodthirsty Kryptonian on Team Dracula with the potential to end most battles before they even began. But here's the thing, Dracula forgot one important detail that we know very well. Because Superman absorbs all that radiation, he is the sun, more or less. And if we know one thing about Dracula, it's that he doesn't like the sun. It kills him. So yeah, no reason for him to get excited for a bright sunny day. Anyways, Dracula nearly pulls off making Superman his minion and even messes with Superman's head, gets him to drink blood, and moves in for the bite. That's when things go sideways for our favorite vampire. The moment Dracula sinks his teeth into Superman's neck, he combusts. Because vampires can't handle sunlight and Superman's cells are packed to the brim with yellow solar energy, in human terms, Dracula basically bites into a nuclear bomb. So yeah, Superman is immune to vampirism. Superman also has one bat-like ability. In Action Comics 1071, Superman finds himself in the Phantom Zone. He was now blind and surrounded by monstrous alien spiders and far from full strength. While this would break most heroes into submission, Clark's not one to quit, so he develops his own version of echolocation, which was something he had been working on for a while. He claps his hands, sends out sound waves, and then listens closely with his super hearing to map out his surroundings. Superman's had god-level hearing for decades, but him using it to figure out the world like a bat or sonar is absolutely new. Furthermore, this ability works inside the Phantom Zone as well, which is basically a place that distorts space and time. If it works there, it would be a breeze on Earth. This gives Superman a new layer of unpredictability. Most enemies come at him with the assumption that if you block his sight, you'll gain an advantage, but that's no longer gonna work. Superman's speed is such that he crosses the universe within seconds, far faster than the speed of light. Superman's speed has always been a bit of a problem, for villains and writers, honestly. Over the years, he's just outrun light and even traveled through time. But all of that is nothing compared to just how fast he really is. You see, he's reached a point where distance, as a concept, doesn't matter anymore. In a recent Action Comics arc, more specifically Action Comics 1050, after returning from his time on Warworld, Superman finds himself caught in one of Lex Luthor's plans. Lex tries to teleport him to the far end of the universe in the hopes of buying himself some time, but Lex didn't account for the fact that Superman now treats universal distance like a quick sprint to the washroom. Within seconds, Clark returns and strips Lex of his power suit. In Superman Up in the Sky #6, a young girl is abducted by an alien scientist for experimentation. She was just one kid from one planet taken by someone who believed her life meant nothing. But Superman doesn't do math like that. He tears across galaxies to bring her back. At one point, the alien traps him in Corinthium steel, which is supposedly unbreakable, but this is the Man of Steel we're talking about. He breaks it, and then he goes on to wipe out an entire battalion of machines that had been beating every hero on Earth. So yeah, it seems traveling across the universe isn't that big of a deal for our guy. Superman can combine his various visions to perform brain surgery. Superman doesn't go out of his way to terrify people because he's simply not that kind of person, right? But every now and then, he reminds them exactly why he holds back by being good and just what he could do if he became a villain without any restraint or qualms about death and destruction. In fact, we've seen in multiple story arcs what happens when Superman loses his shit. Anyways, in Action Comics 775, it's Manchester Black who finds out the hard way. Known for his cynicism, ego, and psychic muscle, Manchester always thought Superman's goodness was a front. So, when the two clashed, Manchester wanted to prove that Superman wasn't who he claimed to be. What he got instead was a lesson in restraint, and what it really means when Superman stops playing nice. One moment, Manchester is taunting Superman, the next, he's flat on his back, unable to feel his powers. He doesn't even understand what happened until Superman explains it. Calmly, almost casually, and with a smirk on his face, Superman explains that he used his telescopic X-ray and heat vision together to scan the bad guy's brain. Once he found an abnormality, he removed it through his vision, kind of like a lobotomy using an invisible laser. Clearly, this wasn't about rage or revenge, and that's why Superman didn't kill him, but he did make a point. If he wanted to, he could dismantle a person at a cellular level without even laying a finger on them. Manchester had believed that power always came with cruelty. Superman proved otherwise when he used his with perfect control. How strong is Superman's punch? In Justice League 25, Superman throws a punch so strong it dents a planet and rattles reality itself. And no, that's not an exaggeration. Trapped in the 6th dimension, which was basically a place designed and built to contain him, he escapes with the help of Batman, who leaves behind a trail of suns to supercharge Superman. Krypton's last sun flies through them one after another, absorbing enough solar energy to take his strength past anything resembling physics. Then, once he's fully powered, he punches his way back into the multiverse and hits hard enough to damage a world designed to survive cosmic collapse. This was seen in the 6th Dimension arc, written by Scott Snyder and drawn by Jorge Jimenez. The multiverse was hanging by a thread after the source wall broke. The World Forger creates a backup reality and tries to convince Batman to brainwash the Justice League into accepting it, but Batman chooses to bet on Superman instead. His message reaches Clark in time, and the suns he left behind do the rest. By the time Superman finishes that cosmic punch, he was moving faster than the universe should allow, and the force was enough to break through the cage and shatter the Forger's false reality. Now, Superman has wrecked moons before, but this was different. This punch cracked a fabricated universe, one engineered to endure the collapse of everything else. And while the World Forger's intentions weren't exactly evil, Superman's punch still put an end to his plan and pretty much forced him to reconsider whose side he was really on. The League gained a powerful ally in the Forger, who saw firsthand what hope backed by strength could do. So yeah, that's how strong Superman's punches can get. I mean, the force is made up of gazillions and gazillions of newtons. How strong is his mind? For most villains, trying to beat Superman with your fists is like you and I punching a 10-foot thick steel block and expecting to make a dent. Most villains figure that out the hard way, so the next logical thing they think about is hitting upstairs. I mean, going after the brain. Problem is, more often than not, that plan has its own issues. Superman knows his mind is more exposed than his body, so he's done the smart thing and built some psychic security around it. Martian Manhunter, who's basically the League's telepath, installed mental safeguards in Clark's head to block unwanted visitors. But even without John's help, Superman isn't helpless in the psychic department. He trained in a Kryptonian discipline called Torquasum Vo, which is basically mental self-defense. It teaches focus, awareness, and resistance against mind-based attacks, and anyone can learn it, not just aliens in capes. In Superman Man of Steel 114, Clark used this training to defeat the Eradicator, who's a walking Kryptonian data weapon with all the powers but none of the chill. For a brief moment in the Golden Age, Superman also tried his hands at telepathy. In Superman 45, he ends up captured by a bunch of aliens called the Collectors. These guys were into hoarding life forms and shoving them into jars. Superman, who was stripped of his powers, couldn't muscle his way out, so he used telepathy to control his captor's mind and make him open the cell. However, writers gave up on this power almost as soon as they wrote it, but it proves that even when his brain is on the ropes, Superman has ways to fight back. Superman's vision is ridiculously OP. Superman's flight and punches get a lot of attention, but it's his eyes that are probably his greatest weapon as well as tool, as they're like a couple of Pandora's boxes of sci-fi nonsense. For starters, Superman can see the entire electromagnetic spectrum. That means he can track radio waves, TV signals, infrared, ultraviolet, you name it. He can spot hidden surveillance, dodge radar, and detect auras around living beings. Basically, if it moves, glows, transmits, or even hums, he's got it locked in. And then there's infrared vision, which helps him see through darkness like it's daylight. Then there's his microscopic vision, which helps him see at an atomic level. He can track pathogens, scan DNA, or read the fine print on a nanobot's instruction manual. On the other end of the spectrum, his telescopic vision gives him the range to see across cities and maybe even continents. The comics don't always put a number on it, but let's just say it's way past Eagle territory. X-ray vision is probably the most famous trick in his arsenal. He can see through walls, boxes, armor, and practically anything that's not made of lead. But even that has a catch. Lead doesn't hide something from Superman, it highlights it for him. If he scans an area and finds an object he can't see through, that's exactly where he focuses. So if you're a bad guy and you hide a WMD beneath lead, you're basically hiding a secret by wrapping it in neon tape. Not a very smart move. As far as his heat vision is concerned, he once increased the temperature of an entire planet using it. Furthermore, Superman once emitted microwave radiation through his eyes to fry electronics. He turned an entire room into a dead zone without lifting a finger, and if things get real bad, he goes full solar flare mode. That's when he releases every bit of stored solar energy in his cells at once, and we earlier told you how much energy he absorbs. The blast fries everything around him and leaves him drained and completely human for about 24 hours. Later, he learned to scale it down into smaller bursts that wouldn't leave him completely powerless, which made it more usable without nuking himself in the process. According to Cyborg, these flares function like an EMP as well. Superman's super senses sometimes serve as a severe shortcoming. Superman might have the strength to pull planets on a chain, or sneeze planets out of the solar system, or nap inside a bloody star, but when it comes to emotional overload, he's not as invincible as he looks. Oh, yeah, by the way, he accidentally destroyed an entire solar system by sneezing near it in Action Comics number 273. Anyways, his senses, which are like cranked to god-tier levels, can sometimes turn on him, especially when they pick up more than his brain can handle. In Green Lantern/Superman, Legend of the Green Flame by Neil Gaiman, Hal Jordan and Clark stumble across an ancient Green Lantern battery. This one's powered by old world magic, not the usual emotional spectrum stuff, and when they mess with it, it flings them straight into what looks like hell. Fire, despair, screaming souls, it was a buffet of all things overwhelming, and Superman, the guy who's usually first in and last out, completely loses it. The problem was his senses. The moment the heroes arrive in this pit of suffering, the sheer amount of pain around him overwhelms every part of him. His hearing picks up cries from every direction, his vision locks onto suffering he can't unsee, and his brain short circuits. Superman hovers mid-air, frozen and mentally paralyzed. Hal Jordan grabs his leg and begs for help, but Superman doesn't even realize it. The good news is that Hal saves the day by forcing his ring to guide them to the Green Flame, a sentient magical force. Turns out, both of them technically died when they touched the battery, and all of this was just a return to life. Interestingly, this story rewrites how Superman sees the world. In World's Finest number 3, Clark easily breaks out of a hell illusion created by Felix Faust because he doesn't believe hell exists in the first place. That kind of faith usually keeps him grounded, but Legend of the Green Flame annihilates that certainty. Not only does hell exist, it broke him. His senses, his hope, his ability to block out the worst of what the universe offers, all of it fails. In fact, we see this in Batman v Superman, where Bruce has to bring Superman down. He begins with high-frequency sonic blasts to disorient him, and this tech attacks Superman's hearing first, proving again that his most powerful tools can be used against him. One of my favorite panels has Batman letting out a sharp dog whistle to deafen Superman while he flirts with Catwoman because he knows the big blue Boy Scout is checking in on him. Can Superman create new stars? Superman's powers have always bent the rules of physics, but there are moments where it seemed like those rules never really existed in the first place. I mean, stuff he does is like godlike, and God doesn't have rules, does he? In All-Star Superman, Clark reveals that he can forge miniature suns from scratch like it's no big deal. Lois asks him what he's feeding his pet alien, and Superman responds with a straight face, suns. What else? And then he picks up a hammer and slams it against a cosmic anvil from New Olympus, creating tiny suns the size of marbles, each glowing and radiant. Although it's played with a bit of humor, sure, the implication is very real. Superman, without needing Earth's sun, can generate his own power supply if he ever needs to. The pet he's caring for is a sun eater which feeds on solar energy. When the creature grows too large for the fortress, Superman releases it into the wild, hoping it finds stars in uninhabited systems. But later, when Superman faces Solaris, the sentient sun, the Sun Eater returns to defend him and dies trying. It's a strange emotional moment with a creature that eats stars and a man who makes them. Now, as mentioned earlier, All-Star Superman does feature a version of Clark who's absorbed more solar energy than usual, which boosts his abilities into mythic levels. But even before that overload, he was still capable of forging suns. For instance, in Superman number 58, by writer William Woolfolk, Superman created a new sun using smashed space debris. So, if he can make yellow suns on command, he can power himself up indefinitely. And if he chooses to create blue or white suns, which increase his strength even more, then technically, there's no limit to how powerful he could get, which makes him truly immortal. Does Superman know the limits of his body? In Superman, Man of Tomorrow number 12, Atlas asks for a day off from holding up the world to attend his daughter's wedding. Superman agrees to fill in, and by fill in, that means holding the entire DC universe. For 12 hours straight, Superman bears the weight of every planet, person, and possibility. And while he's done plenty of impossible things like punching reality, holding black holes, flattening gods, this feat is probably the most difficult thing he's ever done until he does something more impossible and unbelievable. It's been stated in several different media that oftentimes Superman himself doesn't fully know the extent of his powers, and we stand by that. But what do you think? Do you think there's a limit to what Superman can do or not? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and oh, did you watch the movie yet?